Hey all, Rhapsody Battle Tano here, question mark, with the Rap Battle podcast, where I sit down with creators, we talk some shop, and we go into their creative process. And today I'm here with Eddiefrb. Uh,
What's going on, man? How are you doing today?
man, that's a good intro. It's a shame you asked this when we actually joined the call, but I'm doing pretty good, man.
Well, I forgot already, so I need
Okay.
to
Yeah. I could have been doing
I'm a busy
awful,
man,
and you made me remember all the bad things
Yeah,
of
no,
today.
you just go and do it like, no, this is like the worst day of my life. And I was like, oh, cool. That's good, man. Hey, me too.
Yeah, look at us, number 1 and number 16 seed, having a little chat.
Yeah. So this is promotion for our big title match.
Right, of course, yeah. Who do you
Pay-per-view.
who's your money on, man?
My money, I gotta say myself, bruh.
Okay.
I gotta say, I think I
okay.
can do it. I think I'm gonna kick your ass.
That's very mean. Why would
But
you
I gotta
say
I
that?
gotta say, you got a shot, bro. I gotta say it, okay? Like, my money's on myself, but
For
whatever.
for people listening back, we're recording this on the day 1 of Battle of the Year. So the round 1 the round 1 form went out earlier today. And
That's right.
yeah. So it's me versus Eddie. It could be Eddie could win, I could win. Those are the only two possibilities. So, it has to be one of them.
Or we could tie.
We could tie. We didn't
What
really talk
happens
about
if
what
you
do we do in the event
tie?
of a tie. I guess we'll figure it out if it happens.
Do we just? How about we go off of seeding?
That's a really funny idea. That makes
That's
a
great
lot of
idea.
sense, actually. I like that. Let's bully.
just-
No
just-
underdog spirit here.
Yeah, imagine it's like a crazy underdog story, and it just barely ties. Like CJ ties with Dustin, and it's like, well, seeding breaks the tie. And
Yeah,
it's just
man.
like, well,
Hey, look, you should have just
aw,
gone the
man.
extra vote. It's like 1 vote.
Yeah.
How hard could it be?
Should have just been more popular. Man.
Should have just been more popular. Okay. All right. Well, let's not dawdle on Battle of the Year too much. That's the talk for a
That's
different
right.
day, I'm sure.
That's right.
All right. So first question here off the top is, what project do you think you've spent the most time and effort on, kind of from the conception to release?
Well, see, the thing with my production process is that I kind of when I'm working on something, I kind of just let it ruminate in the back of my head for a couple months, and then after I kind of have all the pieces I need, then I put it all together in a pretty quick time frame. But in terms of a project where I was actively working on it myself for the longest, it's cliche, but it's probably Light versus Monica. I mean, by today's standards, some of that stuff hasn't aged super well, but I was working on that basically all of 2021. Even before Ruby versus Mando came out, I was working on a Monica battle.
Ooh.
So, with the writing, it took a really long time to figure out all that stuff, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. But I also had to edit half of it, which, took a fair bit of time. But
Yeah.
the most of what I do personally on my projects, aside from directing, which I don't really count because that's kind of just me, telling people what to do and approving it or not approving it. It's a lot of work, but it's kind of a different thing. Although I want to give a special mention to a couple projects where I didn't if you look at the elapsed time of me actively working on the project, it's probably less than Light versus Monica, but from conception to release, the art for Rick versus GLaDOS for the cover art was done in the middle of 2021.
Right. Yeah.
We only got to making that last year, around a year ago actually. That's kind of crazy. It's been almost a year since then.
I think I remember being in your crew and seeing Rick versus GLaDOS even back then. I don't know if it was.
Yeah.
Was it always Rick versus GLaDOS?
It was originally going to be Rick versus Cave Johnson, the scientist from Portal that owns Aperture Science.
Yeah. Right.
But when I came up with that matchup, I only really knew the combustible lemons thing. I didn't really understand his role in the games because I hadn't played Portal at that point. So I sat down and played Portal. Fantastic games, by the way. Portal 2 is one of my favorite games of all time now. And it occurred to me that Cave Johnson is memorable, and I could have done a Cave Johnson battle. But in terms of Rick being this kind of smart mouth scientist with a personality, wisecracker, I thought that it would have made a much more interesting battle if I just did GLaDOS instead, even if like the connections weren't quite as strong. Because Cave is like an actual guy, and there's some other connections to him and Rick. But I decided to change it to Rick versus GLaDOS after I played the Portal games. But yeah, like the Rick versus Cave idea, like that was like probably in 2020 that I came up with that.
Oh.
So I'd say that was like 3 years from conception to release. And then this doesn't really count, but SpongeBob versus Captain Underpants.
Yeah.
I found a cover art I made for that in like 2017.
And those are all like those are all pretty heavy hitter projects. So I think
Yeah, I would say so.
the like long
Yeah.
time on it makes sense.
I think Light vs. Monica, you know, I'm always going to be proud of it. At the time, there were a lot of people being like, this is the best battle ever. I think most of us can look back now and say, like, it's not. And there are a lot of things about it that are, like, you know, a relic of its time period. But I really did work very hard on that project, and I'm always going to be proud of it. I think there's some things that I executed very well, and I still think it's a great project. My opinion right now is that SpongeBob is the best battle I've ever made. Kind of competing with Tricky versus Springtrap and Stan versus Saul in that category right now for me. And then Rick versus GLaDOS, I mean, I'm still pretty proud of, and it did very well. I feel like that battle's already aged a little bit poorly for me, and it might continue to age poorly. There's some like creative decisions I made that I just don't really sit well with me. Like, I think a lot of people have talked about it, but Wheatley in that battle, no disrespect to Fell, but I kind of was just gonna be that was like an afterthought, and I just thought, like, as long as his role in the battle is like if people understand what he's trying to do, then it'll be fine. But I think it came off as like a lot more. It's the kind of thing where I tried to write it so he was annoying GLaDOS, but it was more that he was annoying the audience, and that's a fine line you got to walk with writing those kinds of characters. But I regret not getting a more accurate voice. I regret not like fine tuning that a little more. And then, of course, no disrespect to the GLaDOS voice actress if she's watching. She's probably not, but I wish I directed the flow a little better because it's a little shaky at points. And the idea was Rick was going to have a very loose kind of, you know, he gets drunk in the second verse. Like, he's supposed to be very human. There's supposed to be a lot of human error. And the idea was that GLaDOS was supposed to have a very almost robotic flow in comparison. And she was also wisecracking, but like it was a lot more like, I don't know, it was like more robotic. Yeah, more calculated, exactly. And I think that kind of comes across in the writing, but not entirely in the performance. And especially in terms of like my attempts at comedy there and the character writing, I've already gotten a lot better at that. So I think that over time it's going to age kind of, maybe not poorly, but in a similar way to Light vs. Monica, where it goes from like one of people's favorite battles ever to just like, there are some problems, but it's pretty good. And you know, that's fine, you know, that's part of the process.
I think I definitely remember hearing the demo to it, and a lot of the direction you're talking about, like that you took with the more like Rick being more loose and GLaDOS being more calculated. I definitely remember picking up on something like that on listen through, and I do remember thinking that on the final release, you know, once the VAs and everything were all done, it was a little, some of that magic was lost. But I think all in all, it's still like a very strong project.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't 100%, but I also really like had never executed something at that scale before. Like, it's not like the biggest project I've ever done, but a lot of the stuff there with like the character interactions and like the improving stuff, like I had never tried that before. So I think that it's like a necessary step for future projects like Eric Cartman versus Charlie Brown, which a lot of people, it's not out yet at the time of recording this. I don't know if it will be when it releases, but that's written. It's been written for a while now, and a response I got to that from a couple people was like, this is just what you're doing with Rick versus GLaDOS, but like a lot better. And I agree, because I was doing a similar kind of thing. But I think I've gotten better at it. So hopefully I can nail it in the production this time, or else it's going to age very poorly. But
We'll see. All right, moving on then. Something I want to talk about is that, from what I can tell, you've almost always done like a themed series with your content. You have like, Animation versus Anything, Pokemon versus Anything, epic FNAF rap battles, My Singing Monsters, Urban Legend, all that. And has that ever made you feel like restricted in what you can do? Like, has there ever been a time where you have thought about just making a general, your Eddie's rap battle, just general series?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Actually, that was going to be my series after I finished Epic FNAF Rap Battles, and then that turned into, I guess it would be My Singing Monsters Rap Battles. It feels like so long ago that all went down, but no, there have been a handful of times where I've thought about, I don't know if I like this theme. I could do more with the general purpose series, but I don't know. I've always really gravitated towards themed series, and I feel like there are probably a couple explanations for why. Generally speaking, as much as ERB was obviously a huge influence on me, just as it was everyone, what really made me interested in making my own rap battles when I was 12 years old, and I was like, damn, I want to do this, was the other fan battles at the time. And it's easy for people who are fans of like the stuff now, like Dustin battles, my battles, Patrick, yada yada, to be like, oh, that stuff back then was trash. But for me, it was like seeing other people who were similar to me in my position making that stuff anyways was what was mainly inspiring to me. That is to say, a lot of my favorite series back then that inspired me were themed series. Because back in 2015, it was more common for there to be series with themes than just general purpose series. And that doesn't mean there weren't any. But
Right.
for example, CMRB, I usually cite as my major inspiration. Like, I love cartoons and animation in general, which, kind of getting ahead of myself here, but led to Animation versus Anything. But I liked CMRB for how they produced their stuff, but I also knew I was always going to like the characters they used because I was into animation. I was into cartoons. And so I'd always know the characters, and I'd always appreciate it on that level. Whereas with ERB, I appreciated what they were doing, but some episodes just hit harder for me than others because I was never a history buff.
Right.
And as much as they have started to use a lot more, movie characters, some game characters, pop culture in general, and they did back then too. I think most people would agree their bread and butter is history.
Oh yeah.
So I would say it's somewhat inconsistent when they use modern pop culture characters. Sometimes they really nail it, sometimes it's not as great.
Sure.
But I really liked, as a 12-year-old who loved cartoons, being able to go to CMRB and being excited for the new upload. Because not only was I going to love the battle, but I was going to know the characters. And I feel like that made for a very strong branding. And it reached just past the creators themselves, and it became the series that people recognized and that they were fans of. And for my own series, for a while I was trying to find my, big thing. And that ended up being Animation versus Anything. But, like you said, I went through a lot of different themes. I tried My Singing Monsters, Five Nights at Freddy's. I tried Pokemon. Pokemon's, my favorite series ever, so that felt like a no-brainer to me. But at the time I started that, there were, a bunch of Pokemon battles, and that kind of had a stigma around it. So, among other reasons, I decided not to do that. I love CMRB. It's the crew for CMRB changed rapidly throughout the years, but it was always CMRB, and it was always the same. That we were all working towards a common goal because at some point I was on the team too. Just subtle there. But what I'm trying to say with all of this is the reason I like themed series mainly is just because I like the branding. I like the fact that people can say, I'm a fan of Animation versus Anything. And because of the versus anything, I'm always going to be exposing people to characters and stuff that they don't necessarily know, which I also like. But I feel like it's a lot easier to have, it's just a stronger brand with AVA,
Sure, yeah.
Just be like Eddiefrb rap battles. Honestly, there are too many choices. There's so many characters, so many matchups. It actually, in a weird way, it helps my creative process to narrow it down on purpose. The trick there is finding a theme that, is restrictive to where it motivates me, but not restrictive to the point where it, impacts the quality of the battles. And I think that's where a lot of theme series will kind of, fall apart.
Yeah, because I would say that animation is, kind of the widest net that you cast with
It's
obviously
one
with
of
all
them,
these.
yeah,
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
it's
I
one of
mean,
the
it's
more
the whole
general.
medium.
It's more the more general like versus anything topics where a lot of things can fall under it, and and also with what you said about like it's a good brand. That is also something that I think I really agree on, is that like it's great that we have so many, in my opinion, versus anything series,
Yeah.
because now you can have fan bases kind of be exposed to, I guess, like the community through
Yeah,
their
that's right.
niche, and they can find
Yeah,
that.
that's what I was gonna bring that up too. Is it's like if you just make a general purpose rap battle series, your primary audience is going to be rap battle fans. But
Sure.
for something like animation versus anything, I believe that as well as rap battle fans being interested, there's not going to be a total overlap. Some of them aren't going to like what I'm doing, but more and more of the episodes are more and more like actually animated now, and that's going to continue as the budget increases and I keep working with more people. To your point, like animation is like a pretty big, like if you do like Pokemon versus anything, if I decided to do that at that level, then I would have like an audience of both rap battle fans and Pokemon fans.
Yeah.
And that's even bigger for like Pokemon only series. Those were very successful back in the day because there were a lot of Pokemon fans as well as rap battle fans. I've met a lot of people now from other communities. They just have overlapping interests, and a very common overlapping interest with creatives I get along with and people I want to connect with my content is animation. So I think it's just the perfect combination of, it's a really good brand, it's very unique. Like if someone tries to do like fan-made animation versus like that's fine, but like it's different than like someone did a Pokemon series and then someone else did a Pokemon series. Like you can't stake a claim in that. But animation versus anything is unique enough to where it's like it's my own thing. It's a brand people can recognize and be fans of, even like past me, which I like, and it allows me to connect with a larger audience than I otherwise would have. So that's why I like.
I asked you if that was ever a restrictive thing, but I suppose the magic of it being versus anything is that you ultimately, the other opponent can always just be whoever interests you, which is great.
Yeah, and I won't lie, there are some characters where the theme makes it difficult to find a matchup. Like I will say, I've been really interested in using the Powerpuff Girls for a while.
Yeah.
But it is remarkably difficult to find a trio that is, similar, that is not also from another animated property. And I have some ideas. I think I know the matchup I want to do now, but there just isn't. Some characters, their best matchups are from the same medium. And that's great if you're doing like CMRB, if both characters are from cartoons. But for animation versus anything, it can be difficult for some very specific characters. And some series are limitations. I think Pokemon versus anything.
Oh yeah.
I won't even get into that because we'll be talking about that for another half hour. But like for me, that's too limiting in what I can do with it.
Yeah.
Animation versus anything is the perfect balance for me. So we'll leave it at that.
Moving away from your like personal content, recently something I hadn't even thought about bringing this up until I saw you talk about it more recently with Walk and FRB, and it's about how like ERB and nostalgia. We talked about ERB before, but you've talked about kind of like the nostalgia a lot of creators hold for ERB, and how it will be interesting that as we're coming up on like over a decade of ERB, now there's this whole community. And now there are people who are coming in as fans of that community, not necessarily like as big of fans of ERB. Kind of what are some things that from ERB that we will continue to see, and then what are some things that are gonna kind of change as like this new line of fans from people like Dustin and yourself? What are the things in the community that will change as a product of that, you think?
Well, I think we're kind of in a really interesting period. Like you said, I was talking about that recently. And I think my answer for you right now, I'm going to give you an answer, but for me, it's like, I think that's what's going to be decided in these next 3 to 4 years. I think that the biggest part of Dustin's rise, and it's not just Dustin, obviously, a lot of people have contributed to the community getting bigger. But the way I see it, rap battles are becoming more of a genre than just like epic rap battles of history and then epic rap battles of history ripoffs. And because of that, I like you said, I think that, you know, there are going to be people who grew up watching me or Dustin or, you know, someone else from this era who never watched ERB. And I think, in my opinion, that's like the sign of a healthy genre, as people are, you know, there's a passing of the torch kind of moment. Because ERB, even though they're still technically active, you know, they kind of taken a back seat, you know, and I know they want to start getting, you know, I won't get into that. Like, I wish the best for ERB. I'd love to see them be active again. But fact is, for the past, like, 3 or 4 years, they've been kind of, you know, doing their own thing, only releasing a couple projects. So that's, in part, a big reason why people like me and Dustin have been able to step forward in the lane, is because there are a lot of people who miss ERB and, you know, they'll settle for something else. And that settling for something else turns into, hey, wait a minute, these guys are really good on their own merits. And that's when it becomes more than just ERB ripoffs, and I think that that's the best end game possible. But in terms of what changes, see, it's going to be interesting. My immediate thought is that one of the big reasons why I really like rap battles in general, and why I think they have a bright future, is that back in the day when ERB came out, the whole, like, history, like, silly videos, comedy videos stuff that they did, they were like 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes each, like, that was very suited towards that era of the internet.
Sure.
The internet has now changed, and I'm not saying ERB style doesn't work anymore, but I think that using a very similar style with more relevant, you know, nostalgia pop culture characters is a great way to take the same format and revitalize it. And I'm not convinced that ERB themselves are the right people to really take the medium and do that with it. They've been trying, and they've been doing better. Like, they used Thanos, they used, you know, they recently put out, like, a demo. Yeah, Laura Croft. Like, they're doing it. But, like, I mean, like, ERB's never going to use Freddy Fazbear. Never going to use Pomni. You know what I mean?
Right, of course.
Like, clip this if this ages poorly, but I think you get my point here. I think there's a generation of younger people who, you know, they will be interested in content like that if it's with characters they know and recognize. And I think the format's just very well suited for that. You know, back in the day, it was creepypasta characters. And, you know, some people still use creepypasta characters, but I think, you know, your Pomnies and your, like, Preston's Hourglass and Five Nights at Freddy's, or, you know, Garten of Banban, like, whatever it is, I think stuff like that, the viral internet stuff pairs really well with online parody music or nerdcore music. And I think more and more the rap battle community is starting to become a part of the nerdcore community, more so than, like, its own little distant island and, you know, far off in the ancient lands of whatever the fuck. So I think that one of the main things that's going to change is just that, like, it's going to be, I don't want to say like a younger audience, because, like, the fan base for rap battles has always been pretty young. Sure. But I mean, I think the appeal for people will be closer to what the appeal was for, like, you know, The Living Tombstone when I was, like, 12 years old with, like, the Five Nights at Freddy's song. I think, like, we're just going to become more of, like, that, you know, the nerdcore appeal, where it's like people love the characters more so than the series itself. Now, I think that's something that, like, creators, like, individual creators are going to have to battle with the trends going that way. That's something I'm trying to battle.
Is still, like, still have like an identity.
That's right. Because I think that as much as rap battles are becoming more popular, the fact that there's so many people doing them now means that, like, it's more like the genre is more popular, but the artists themselves kind of blend together. I've seen a lot of people mistake my battles for Dustin battles. I've seen people mistake Dilly for Dustin battles. I've even seen people mistake, like, the Mr. Beast Dustin battle for ERB themselves. So I think that's something going forward that's also going to change, is that we're going to have to fight harder to, you know, maintain our independence and get individual audiences that are interested in us specifically, instead of just, like, the genre as a whole. Because it is good to have people interested in that, but if you're going to be a successful YouTuber that makes, like, a living off of it, which, you know, if the genre's big enough, you would hope that there would be people who would be able to do that. I think that it's not going to be enough to just make good content. You have to make good content, and you also have to stand out, and people have to know who you are as well as what you make.
And that's something that I wanted to pitch also maybe as a difference moving forward is that we could also see like a rise of, you called it a genre, and so I guess the term subgenre would be most appropriate here, of like within the genre of rap battles. And you've explored this a lot, and we'll get into that later, of like music influences. There's a lot of different music influences and that we're seeing those a lot more in FRB now. Not even just like musical influences, but they're creators who specialize in more like story-oriented projects, or creators who are more suited for like shorter, more like bite-sized projects. They're like all those sorts of things. I think that'll be something that, like you said, with all the new creators that we see, the market is reaching to a kind of point where you do need to kind of start also building an identity on top of just, here's what I do and here's what I like. And I think that'll be something we'll definitely be seeing with maybe not even the best creators, but like the most prominent ones for the next few years.
And that goes back to what I was saying in the last question about themed series. Because if it does get to a point where you need that identity, if you just have a general purpose series, it's going to be harder for you. And I think if you have a theme and you're that popular, it's, you'll have an easier transition if that is where the landscape goes. That's where I think it's going to go, but, it's hard to say for sure.
Of course.
But it's, if you have a series name and a series theme that, like, people can get attached to, it's easier for people to say, you hear people say, I'm a fan of ERB. You don't necessarily hear as many people say, oh, I love Nice Peter and Epic Lloyd. Because it's like they love the series.
Yeah.
And it's like, by extension, you like Nice Peter and Epic Lloyd. But
sure.
I feel like history is going to repeat itself in that sense. But it's going to be an even bigger importance because, like, for the longest time, there were no competitors to ERB. And now I think there are a lot of them. I don't think necessarily that anyone is going to replace ERB. I don't think that it's a conversation of people being better than ERB. I think there are just other prominent creators that are doing similar things now, and that will change the landscape. And I think that, like you said, being, having your own identity and standing out and having people know who you are as well as your content is going to be one of the biggest changes going forward as like you said, the subgenre grows more and more.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Let's go back to the past of it and have an Eddie take on the past here. Well, a different kind of Eddie take on the past. You have talked about Peridot versus Zim before from the CMRB. I forget what the exact wording you gave it was, but you said something along the lines of like it's one of the best aged battles, and even more so from its era. And I think it'll be interesting for people like myself who weren't around for that battle, and coming into it now with all this new, arguably better content. I don't, maybe not arguable, but like all this new content.
What you're saying. I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah. Kind of explain what's the significance of that battle to you, and why do you personally put stake in it, I guess?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, CMRB was like my major inspiration. I would say there are a lot of creators that inspired me. I would say if I had to pick one, it would be CMRB. I've always been very vocal about that. Peridot versus Zim, I believe it was 2017. I could be wrong on that, but it was in that era. So, at the time when Peridot versus Zim came out, it was like one of the best battles, like, because people just didn't make anything better. But you're right in the sense that since then I've started to talk about like Peridot versus Zim has aged very well.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons, right? Okay, so even earlier then, so
yeah.
It actually contributes to my point. But with Peridot versus Zim, I think that there are some older battles that I don't want to say accidentally, because that sounds demeaning, and I wasn't in the writer's room. But there are some aspects to Peridot versus Zim that, on a reflection, come off as very impressive that I don't know if it was fully intended. I think the main thing that gets talked about that I agree with is the video itself is really impressive because there is a very consistent color scheme going on throughout all of it, and even in the thumbnail. And it's in a way where I don't think it was like, they probably had it in their head like, oh, we want to make it green, but it's more than that. There's more accidental like nuances to it, like with the accents and stuff, to where even though the editing's kind of janky, you know, in that older style, I think it's actually really impressive and interesting to look at if you look at it from a sense of like color theory. And color theory is something I take very seriously in my projects. Not in every single one of my edits, but definitely in my, you know, I do on my own thumbnails. And in my thumbnails, that's a huge thing for me. So it's really interesting to see, you know, all the cool colors and then the highlights of like the pinkish reds. Like it's in both sides and it's in almost all of the shots. So the video is one thing that I think, if looked at through that lens, it's accidentally aged very well. But the other and more important thing that I think is more interesting that ties back to our previous conversation a little bit is that I think that it was kind of ahead of its time in terms of what it was good with, what he was good at, I guess you could say, in the sense that I think that the character writing and portrayals are very strong in that battle. I think that the voice actors are both very good in it, and it's not flawless. Anthony Perry doesn't really sound that much like Zim, but he sounds, he feels like Zim, I guess is the simplest way I could put it. And in that battle, as much as some of the writing itself, like content-wise, hasn't aged the best, I think that we're heading into a time where, you know, the character-centered, more extreme, you know, funny battles where it's sillier, I guess you could say. Because for a while, like 2020 to 2022, I'd say, kind of had the rise of like Orchestrap with like what Dustin pioneered with Freddy vs. Pennywise, that kind of took over. That was like what I did when I was first starting out in 2020.
Very kind of technical era, and now we're seeing people kind of, now that a lot of people have that technical skill, it's interesting to see kind of like, okay, well, you know, let's explore the stuff that you're working with more with a lot of character portrayals. Because like you said, that is something that I think a lot of people are doing more, and I think especially this year, I'm very interested to see the kind of, I almost want to call it a boom of like character-focused battles.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I don't know if you're going to ask about this later, but that's kind of the identity of my own series going forward, is that's what I want to focus on and, you know, lead into the future. But that's getting ahead of myself. In terms of Peridot versus Zim, I don't think that it's like the best character-written battle ever, but compared to other 2016 battles, if you, as a 2024 rap battle viewer who had never seen any of those older battles, watched all the way through most of the big 2016 battles, I guarantee you that Peridot vs. Zim is way more successful in its character portrayals. The voice acting is really interesting. I think the beat they chose is very tasteful, and it fits the characters, and it's actually aged quite well. And like I said, the video, be it accidental or not, there are some really creative and ahead of its time concepts there with color theory. And when I say it's aged well, it's, you know, half in an accidental way, half in a, you know, intentional way, because obviously, like I said, it was good at the time. But you'll see a lot of battles from that era. They're really good in ways that, like, were just improved upon later. Like a battle that had really good editing in 2017, if that was its star quality, it's not going to have aged very well because people have just gotten better at editing. But I think the things that Peridot vs. Zim excels at are such a unique combination of traits that were not very common in battles from that era, that are becoming more and more relevant and interesting to look at in modern battles, that to rewatch it now through a certain lens, like I said, it's interesting to see how well it's aged and almost how well it's predicted the future of the community to come. And so, you know, I do think I really like Zim versus Peridot. I have a lot of nostalgia with it. I wouldn't argue it's like one of the best battles ever made, but I do think it's one of the battles that's aged very well in terms of how it's put together and how how you can watch it as a modern rap battle viewer compared to how a modern rap battle viewer can watch most other stuff from 2016 and 2015.
Right. I wonder what else, it makes me wonder if there are any other projects like that from the older eras where they did something that was not really conventional at the time and it may not have shined, but today it would be interesting to see like that those are things that absolutely would be praised today. And I do have one other example of a battle that aged, and I won't go too off on a tangent about it, but Samara Morgan versus Ghostface by Dustin. Yeah. Oh my god. I think it's kind of maybe the most accidentally genius battle ever. Scream movies
are like parodies of horror movies.
Sure.
And I think that when Samara Morgan versus Ghostface was created, it was played very straight. But now, looking at it through 2024 lens, a lot of the stuff in it is like super cliche and like uses a lot of tropes that became very common in rap battles later. And in that sense, it would normally be to a project's detriment. Like, I would say, like, an example is, like, the bargain bin lines. Like, oh, you found you at the bargain bin at Blockbuster. And just, like, the way the beats put together, some of the issues with it, like, Ghostface not having gloves, I think was a big thing. There were a lot of things there that were issues at the time, or just what was accepted at the time, that when recontextualized through the lens of something that could be viewed as satire of the genre, it becomes kind of accidentally genius in a way that he absolutely did not intend while he made it.
No,
but
probably
because
not.
Scream, I would say a good example of a modern battle doing something similar but on purpose is Ghostface versus Baldy by Benjamin.
Yeah.
But I think that the Dustin battle does very similar things with Ghostface, but completely accidentally, and it makes it really fun to watch back and look out for the things that have aged poorly that you can now read as like meta commentary. Feels like it kind of predicted the future.
And I've always been like a fan of that battle. And you're right, of like, as time goes on, it becomes more cliche, but almost to an enjoyable extent where if you look at it as this Ghostface battle that's making fun of even just like general horror battles, every decision seems so intentional, even though at the time it almost definitely wasn't.
Yeah, it's amazing how well it works through that lens when there was no way that was intentional.
For sure. So yeah, we kind of teased the idea of talking about this before the call, but you know, let's just get into it with Light versus Monica. Of, you know, that's your big thing, and you know, I'm sure some people out there do not need to hear more about it, but something that I think is interesting looking back is that while like looking back on your content, Light vs. Monica, it still stands out because it does seem like there's so many little details and directions. In any other project, it would be like such an impressive thing, but in this there are so many of them, and it all, you know, it's all obviously very intentional, very directed. Even the idea of like the time signature, I don't want to call it a gimmick because I think that word has a negative connotation for it, but I can't think of a.
But I see what you mean.
Yeah, it was a thing that like not a lot of people
done before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't typically kind of do that with a lot of your projects where you have something that I would consider a gimmick. You have like vibes and like direction, obviously, but you don't necessarily do something that kind of like challenge. I don't want to say challenges, but like, you know, something that is more different, something more out of the box, I guess. So kind of,
yeah.
How did that go about? How did you go about integrating like pretty much all of what you did with Light versus Monica?
Well, I'm not gonna, you know, go into detail on every single idea because then we would be here for quite a while. But I'll talk about a couple of them. A big thing for me was, and it was kind of a prototype of what I do now. I wanted to make it less feel like a fair rap battle in the traditional sense and more like what would actually happen if the two characters met in the same world.
Yeah.
So that kind of, you know, it's kind of a story in a way that it tells, where like, you know, Light shows up and he reveals himself and he tries to kill Monica, but Monica's like a file, so he doesn't write monica.chr, so it doesn't work, and then Monica's all cocky. Then Light kind of loses his composure in the second verse, and then then Monica kind of establishes herself as like, you're not playing God here, I'm playing God. And then she references the whole fourth wall breaking stuff and code altering stuff by changing the time signature of the beat. So all of that kind of, basically in a very simple way, all of the decisions I made that you could call gimmicks tie into that idea of making a narrative that portrays what would happen to the characters, but does it in a musical way. So like I said, the time signature change would be, it represents how Monica changes the code and changes the characters in Doki Doki Literature Club. And I thought a fun parallel of that, instead of just having Monica like talk to me directly, which a lot of Monica battles do. They just talk to the creator. I thought a more fun and in-character way to represent Monica's abilities would be to have her alter the beat or the battle itself, which is why I did that. And then, yeah, I mean, in terms of writing Light, I think a lot of people, since it's come out, have been more critical of the Light portrayal.
Right.
For a couple of reasons. I think the reason that's most interesting to talk about is that a lot of people think he was portrayed like way too emotionally, and that he was kind of set up to lose in the battle, especially in the second verse where he kind of just has a meltdown and starts fast rapping with like a rhyme scheme, which I admit has not aged the best. At the time, maybe more impressive, but right now, no one's really looking at that and going, wow, you really next level type shit. So that was kind of a relic of its time.
Yeah.
But what a lot of the common criticisms of it is like, oh, well, Light kind of just like loses. Like, he doesn't even really have a second verse. He just kind of has a tantrum. And my response back then, and I guess still today, is that that was intentional, because I think that would happen if Light met a character that was basically him but stronger, that he couldn't affect. Because the idea is that Light in that battle is like post L's death. Where he's like kind of on top of everything. So it's before Nier gets him, but it's after L kills him. Spoiler. Is where I kind of wanted to get into. Whatever, bro. If you've seen the battle, bro, you know way more than that. But I wanted to portray Light at his most confident, because I thought it was interesting to do it that way compared to Monica, who's I also portrayed pretty calmly and confidently.
Yeah.
So, you know, the reason why I wrote Light like that, a lot of people don't really agree with the decision. I don't think it was perfect in hindsight, but I really did want to make it so that it felt like if Light and Monica were meeting at that point in both of those characters' journeys, what would happen exactly? How would they deal with each other? What would they say to each other? And I feel like in that sense, if you just look at what happens, it's a huge success, because I think that something like that absolutely would happen. Because, I mean, literally what happens in the show, I guess spoilers again here, but Light, the more powerful he becomes, the more arrogant he becomes, and the more mistakes he makes. Yeah. And when he gets cornered by Nier in the warehouse in the final episode, or the final 2 episodes, he does have a fully fledged breakdown rant, and it's become infamous. It's like the most iconic scene in the show. But you'll see that even in the video of Light's second verse, what he does there is a direct parallel to what he does when he finally gets caught. And like I said, the idea there was that he has now realized that Monica is a level above him. There's nothing he can do, and he's just kind of screwed. So he gets emotional and starts lashing out. And in my head, the way that I could portray that in an interesting way in a rap battle sense was to have him kind of have like a freak out technical like fast rap thing where he just got angrier and angrier. And my thing was like, it's not going to be like balanced. Monica's going to win the battle, but it's going to sound really cool and it's going to be interesting narratively. And I still stand by the fact that aside from a couple execution things that could have been better, that base idea was still executed very well. Yeah. Where I had Light lose the battle, but that was what I wanted to do. And I think that gets into more of a philosophical discussion of like, oh, well, you know, is it bad to have a one-sided rap battle? And for me, I have other projects in the works that are more story-based, where there's technically a winner in that same vein, so
same.
Other people might not prefer those. But I think that's really interesting, and it was really fun to write, and like you said, it was very difficult to put together, but that's one of the main reasons why I still love that project so much, is that explaining it through that lens of like, this is what would happen if the characters met up. I feel like I nailed that, and it still holds up today. And so, you know, that's kind of the reason why I did what I did.
Yeah, I was gonna say of like, that's something that, again, like I said, that we've talked about before, is that we continue to see that kind of battle that where it's become less and less about, you know, oh, let's have these characters rap at each other. It's let's have these characters interact in their respective environments. Let's put these characters in each other's environments and kind of see what unfolds because of it. And I think if you want to view it, if you want to view Light vs. Monica from that angle, it still, to a certain extent, it still is, you know, ahead of its time. I do think you're right of like, you know, there's a couple things here and there that are like, a little strange is a little strange in looking back. But if you want to follow,
Yeah, I will, if I can interject quickly. One of the things that I would have done differently is Light is very misogynistic in the battle.
yeah,
And he's not in Death Note. It's kind of questionable. You know, a lot of people think he's gay because he just does not pay any attention to the women in the series. He's not the nicest to women, but he's not the nicest to anybody. And I think when doing the research in 2021, I kind of overread how much of a misogynist he was. And like, it's not like he's like, it's just like the majority of the content in his second verse is gendered, and I think that in particular doesn't really read with the idea I was going for, with like, oh, he's having a breakdown about his power. He does talk about that, but he spends the first 4 verses of his fast rap just talking about how she's a woman. You know,
yeah.
basically.
I was gonna
Just
say, like the very first
Yeah.
line, I think ages kind of poorly. The kind of one that I jumped to
Yeah.
for one reason or another is like the fucking such a chicken. No wonder losers thirst over your thighs. That's like,
Yeah, oh yeah.
it's so like,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, for someone who like has grilled me on the fucking for Gel versus Geru, to a certain extent, like you have not escaped that kind of thing yourself, and you know that is part of everything. But I think it is funny to look back on, like, man, we need more women to like call us out when shit like that happens. So yeah, after Light versus Monica, you've said this, is that you've taken a step away from doing your orchestra, you're more like, you know, those kind of battles. And what I think is interesting is that, you know, from there, almost kind of every project that you've done has a certain kind of influence, has a certain style, has a certain homage in even some places to, you know, other types of media. And what I want to quickly do, because you know you have a lot of content since Light vs. Monica, but I want to quickly go over and kind of get your call on what each battle after Light vs. Monica kind of, what was the direction, like, you know, in a shorthanded way, kind of what was the direction on that. So, you know, we can start right afterwards with Yakko versus Kermit. Was there a specific kind of direction for that?
Yeah, I'll just give you a brief rundown. Not all of them are inspired by kinds of music. Some of them are just vibes.
Right.
Yakko vs. Kermit is a weird one because it was written way before it came out. So for all intents and purposes, it was made before Light vs. Monica. It just came out after. But the idea there was I wanted to do a puppetry battle, and we had Michael. Shout out Michael if you're listening. He was gracious enough to make a Yakko puppet, and we wanted to have kind of the worlds converge there. And I considered having I considered having Kermit be animated in the first half to kind of represent that, but it fell through, so we just did PNG. But basically the main idea there was I want to do a short, fun, catchy battle with some puppet stuff, because I'd never done any puppet or live action stuff, and even like puppetry in general is not very common in the community.
Yeah.
So as far as that goes, I think we succeeded, but there are other things I don't love about that project in hindsight. For Duck vs. Goose, I wanted to make a battle that didn't take itself very seriously, because I felt like a big problem with my work up to that point was I took myself too seriously. So I made something that was intentionally extremely goofy to a degree that would have otherwise made me uncomfortable. And I had the idea of casting Stupendium to say a whole bunch of vulgar things that they normally wouldn't say.
Yeah.
Which they were gracious enough to do for me. Again, I won't spend the whole time talking about, oh, well, I don't like this one that much anymore, because I still do like the project, but, you know, obviously I think I've come a long way in terms of making projects that don't take themselves seriously. I think there's still a try-hard element to how non-try-hard it was, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I get what you're saying.
But yeah, I just wanted to make a goofy battle that people didn't expect coming from me specifically at that point. For Blitz vs. Pico, the main influence was funk music, which I've since kind of not fallen out of interest with. An artist specifically I was really inspired by was Harper, Haarper, and that inspired the production mainly. But aside from the sound that I wanted to be funk inspired, I was continuing to experiment with comedy writing and characters that don't take themselves as seriously with Blitz. And the idea was that it would be a half and half, where Blitz was all in on like the character and the comedy, and Pico was all in on the flow and the rapping. And I think that created a really interesting dynamic that, you know, had the project age pretty well, all things considered.
Oh yeah.
But that was just kind of one of the, probably my first big foray into exploring a musical style.
Yeah.
And it's not like a dedicated funk battle, but like it's the instrumental mainly. Blue versus Monokuma, I just really liked the matchup, and I kind of figured it out as I went. It's kind of funny now because I'm very adamant about not doing Danganronpa battles anymore.
Right.
But I do, you know, there was a time where I liked Danganronpa. So I wanted to use Monokuma specifically because aside from the Patrick one with GLaDOS a year prior, I felt like Monokuma hadn't been used in a way I was satisfied with. And I just thought pairing him up against Blue was very funny, and I really liked that matchup. So that was kind of more of I had a beat that I liked for it. I had ideas for like the writing and stuff, and it all kind of came together organically. In a similar way to the last couple, it was just doesn't take itself very seriously, which I
don't want to tangent too much, but that does bring me to something I quickly want to ask. I might be wrong here, but I feel like I remember seeing McLean versus Monokuma be something you considered for a minute.
That's right.
In the crew.
Yeah, I was going to do Chris McLean versus Monokuma since 2020.
Yeah,
the main reason why I didn't use Chris McLean is because I don't like Total Drama. I watched the first season and I thought it was terrible.
That's
I hated
so
it.
Fair.
And as much as I really do like Chris McLean as a character, I felt like there was so much more I could do with Blue, and it would have been less expected, so it was kind of more on brand for me. Because like a lot of my matchups up to that point, like, aren't the common matchups, like Shay versus Crazy Dave, Light versus Monica, Duck versus Goose Game. It feels kind of weird to think about it now, but like before they came out, no one was talking about those matchups. Like those were very weird choices for those characters, and so that was something I was always very interested in back in this era. Was, you know, Blitz versus Pico too. Just doing kind of weirder matchups that people wouldn't expect. So, you know, the reason I didn't go through with Chris McLean is literally just because I don't like Total Drama, and I thought I liked Blue as a Monokuma opponent better. I might revisit Chris McLean at some point. He's probably the most requested character, but I don't want that. I don't want to do it just because of that, so we'll see. Maybe I'll get an idea at some point. Tricky versus Springtrap, inspired by trap metal.
Obvious,
primarily. I got the chance to work with Peso Pete. Shout out Peso.
Shout out Peso.
Working with him on you know, something else right now. We may be cooking up something else for this year. Just a little spoiler there.
If that doesn't release this year, you're gonna look really stupid, man.
No. I don't worry. This is in the works, bro. We confirmed it. Okay, we're working on it. Yeah, Tricky versus Springtrap, trap metal, both in terms of the instrumentation and also the writing and the vocal performances are very loud and aggressive and in your face. Not so much Springtrap, but like he kind of matches the vibe with like being sinister. And then that's also kind of a Blitz versus Pico type thing where it's like half very character focused, half very rap focused. And that was a dynamic I liked exploring a lot back then, which continues on to Toothless versus Pikachu, which I wanted to be more of like a nerdcore battle where I had two artists associated mainly with nerdcore, and make it like take itself very seriously and be more of like an epic orchestral cinematic thing. It was the first and last time since Light versus Monica that I've really tried to do something like that. I really love How to Train Your Dragon, and I wanted to make a battle that kind of captures the cinematic elements of that movie. I was maybe a little out of my depth, but I still am pretty happy with how it turned out. But I wanted to make a nerdcore battle, basically, and that's what I did with that. That was my spin on it. Lo-Fi versus Cassette Girl. I love sample-based instrumentation.
Yeah.
It's my favorite kind of beat. My favorite artist right now is Kanye West. And a big reason for that. Reason. That's a crazy soundbite. The big reason for that is his production and the sampling he does. It goes without saying, you know, some other stuff Kanye's been doing recently that don't condone necessarily, but
Great that you said
in terms
that.
of the
Thank you.
production, yeah, no, I know you needed that. Lo-fi vs. cassette is like, I love sample-based production. I wanted to do another battle that was like a deep dive into a musical style, and
Yeah.
Lo-fi vs. cassette is kind of a mix of like funky, like 90s type sample-based instrumentation, and lo-fi,
obviously lo-fi,
hip-hop. And then I also brought on two nerdcore adjacent voice actresses, Dahlia and Stargirl. Shout out to both of them.
Shout out.
And they did a fantastic job. But that was another low stakes project, kind of like Yakko versus Kermit.
But yeah, I think with something like Lo-Fi vs. Cassette, that to a lot of people is so, it's formed on the basis of, you know, its style and the style and presentation and, you know, all of that stuff. I almost kind of makes the battle. And a lot of people, myself included, love it because it is such a, like, when we were talking about subgenre earlier, that's literally the first example I go to now of, like, there could be a whole genre of these type of battles, and I think that'll be happily welcome, so long as they're made by, you know, the right people. But yeah.
No, I think the Brat battle's superb. I think it's aged better than even some of the ones I put out since then last year, and I think that it's going to be one of the better aged projects in my catalog from this recent run.
Hope so.
I love how it sounds. I love the aesthetic. Mario worked on the color schemes a lot to really bring the feeling together. Cassette Girl's visuals are a lot, you know, they have cooler colors like the blues, the purples, and then Lo-Fi Girl is more of like a summer or like a fall type, summer type vibe with like the warmer colors with the cool accents. So like you said, the vibe is basically the big part of that one. And then I brought in a bunch of different influences from, you know, vibe-based music genres and adapted them. Rick versus GLaDOS, kind of similar to Blue versus Monokuma, where I just liked the matchup and I wanted to portray the characters. Like I said earlier in the interview, I originally was gonna have it be more of like a commentary on like scientists, like robotic versus like human. And that didn't necessarily come through entirely, but you know, that was an idea I had. But, you know, aside from that, I just wanted to use the characters, and I wanted to practice writing characters like that more, because that's something I'm still working on getting right. And I think I was closer this time, but still not 100%. Megumin versus Ralsei. Maybe, I don't know about this one. I will say that the reason I did it and what I wanted to do, I think I succeeded, is that I really wanted a battle that was like extremely campy and had like the isekai feel. So like if you ever seen an isekai anime, or if you've seen like, you can find messages of me talking about this.
No. We can talk about this one for a quick second. Okay. I mean, obviously this is the one to talk about, because this is very like, you know, obviously even back when you pitched this, I was already kind of invested in like, okay, let's see how Eddie tackles. And I will say, you know, not to dog it while it's down, but I would like to call into attention that before 2023 started, even, I don't know how far you got into it, but I called looking at your upcoming catalog. I remember looking at it with some friends, and I was like, Eddie I don't think Megumin versus Ralsei is Eddie's kind of thing. I can't see a world where that becomes like an Eddie classic. And you know, sometimes I just end up being right, and I'm
You are not the only one who called that, bro. Fucking
no, I know plenty of others, but I would like to say I think I was pretty vocally aware of the fact that like, I don't know, this does seem a little off for Eddie. But I do think I mean, since it's time, here's what I'll say. It strangely hasn't aged at all, as in like, it's the same. I view it almost the same now as I did then, where there are a lot of creative decisions where I disagree with how they're done per se. But like, you know, as a battle, it's another Eddie battle. You know, it has a lot of your good work. I guess that's like strangely the biggest benefit I can give to it, is that where other battles like have shown age, you know, I think reception to this wouldn't change all too much if it released now compared to when it did at the time.
I think I agree with that, actually. So I said before I regret making it just because I don't think it was a very good idea. all things considered. But I enjoy the discussion around it. And in a way, I think that the fact that this is my most controversial and disliked project kind of says a lot, because this is so much better than a lot of Dustin battles from the past couple of years.
Come on, man.
Like, no, listen, hey, listen though, because if this is my worst project, I feel pretty good about myself, bro. Like, I'm pretty good. Like, if this and Denji vs. Wolverine are like, man, he really missed with those ones. Like, if anyone else put that shit out, they'd be like, yo, this is amazing, this is so fire. So, I don't know, in a way, it kind of makes me feel better about myself.
Sure,
that even though they're not that bad, the fact that people treat them like they're that bad means that people expect so much from me and they think very highly of me. So I take it as more of a compliment now, because people think very highly of my work, and even when there's a slight dip, like Megumin versus Ralsei, or it's a bit of a misfire, it reads as a lot more of a failure than it actually is. I think that ties into your point about it hasn't really aged, because I think what was wrong with it on release is still what's wrong with it now. I think my main problem with it is just that it's very corny, and I could go into more specifics. I won't go into too much detail, but you know, it's very corny, and like I said, that was kind of the point, but it's also kind of hard to watch to a degree. So unfortunate, but you know, in a vacuum, it's okay. I don't love it, I don't hate it. Probably my least favorite of last year, but yeah, I just wanted to make something corny. SpongeBob vs. Captain Underpants. You know, there's no musical style it's inspired by. I just wanted to make a battle with the characters.
Yeah.
And I think it turned out really well. We don't have to spend too much time talking about that one. That one kind of speaks for itself. Denji vs. Wolverine, the other battle I don't love from last year. And I think part of it is because the idea was I wanted to make a more well-rounded Blitz versus Pico. Because a lot of people said, like, Pico sounds really good, the Blitz flow isn't very good. I think that opinion's kind of like people have softened up a bit on it because it's a little more complex than that. But I was like, all right, well, and I'm gonna make a battle where both of the characters are goofy and both of them have really good flow. Didn't necessarily pan out 100%. I think the characters are both portrayed well and the flow is pretty good, but it kind of takes what people loved about Blitz versus Pico and just kind of dumbs it down. And so even though it's still pretty good, it's just kind of like a, why watch this when you could watch Blitz versus Pico?
That's an interesting outlook on that. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Well, that is like literally what I intended while I made it, and I don't make battles like that anymore. So
sure.
In that sense, it's aged poorly for me. Stan versus Saul, similar to kind of the SpongeBob, because now we're kind of getting into a point where it's just I want to portray these characters instead of like, oh, I have this idea of like I want the battle to sound like this, I want it to be like this with these big ideas. I just want to make it a fun character interaction. I think these two characters would interact well together. That's what I did with SpongeBob versus Underpants, with Rick versus GLaDOS, and with Stan versus Saul too. So again, there isn't a whole lot to talk about there. I just wanted to portray the characters, work on my character writing, and I think I did a really good job of that.
Moving on then, so you are someone, and we talked about this, who's like super focused on improvement. I don't know if this is necessarily what you kind of do to a T, but there's a lot of like the next big thing for you, where I think that's not like it's not necessarily a consistent theme, but it's something that you've talked about in the past, and it's something that we've seen in the past with like, and you've literally talked about it before earlier while we were like discussing our old project, but like this reattempted, or you know, this is like a different version of this.
Right.
And I think it's interesting to kind of see with you specifically, because you're at such a kind of high level, you know, where do you think it's, you know, pushing you forward, and where do you think it's holding you back?
Oh, you mean like how hard I am on myself and like my motivations and stuff?
Yeah, that kind of thing. And the other thing that I am interested in, that this might be this might not have a more definitive answer, but have you ever thought about the idea of like, because you're kind of hard on yourself, do you think there's ever kind of a point where you reach that kind of a limit, if you want to say that, of like, well, this is about as much as you can kind of give, and that there isn't much that you can improve on outside of that? Do you think that's ever something that you've considered happening?
What I will say is that once I reach a point where I don't think there's anywhere further to go with battles, I will quit making battles.
Okay,
Because
right.
I don't find
Fair
it
enough.
anymore. I have ginormous aspirations for the future. I have so many ideas. My problem right now is that one, I have too many ideas to make happen, and two, most of them are too complex to make happen right now. But
Yeah.
if the issue is like, I don't know if you run out of idea, like no, like if I had infinite resources, I would transform the game today.
Wow.
But I don't, so I have to work with what I have. How is it like a limitation, or I guess I think if most people worked the way I do it, it wouldn't be very much fun. I like the challenge, and I'm hard on myself because I enjoy the process, but I also enjoy the process knowing that at the end of the road, I'll have a finished project that I can look back on. One of the reasons I love doing what I do is because, as opposed to other hobbies, which I'm not talking down on, because I've had a lot of hobbies where I just kind of burned money. But as much as I spend a lot of time and money on my hobby, I have something to show for it. And these videos are going to exist in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. When I'm like 60 years old and I want to look back, like I haven't thought about rap battles for the past 30 years, I can look back and be like, look what I made when I was younger. That's pretty cool.
For sure.
So for me, I really like improvement and learning when it's something I am personally passionate about. So I think one of the greatest strengths of my mindset is it gets results, I guess is what you could say. I more than anyone else in the community, I would say my success has been brute forced. I decided one day
fair.
I'm tired of not being the best. I want to be the best. And ever since then, I've been working to become the best. Once I do become the best, then my journey has started. Now I can start doing what I want to do. But right now I'm still kind of in the training arc because I don't feel like I'm the best right now. Well, I do, but like I don't feel like people you universally consider me the best.
And
I think Dustin still rightfully holds that crown because of how important he's been. I believe that right now is my opportunity to, with my new character-driven style, with my writing and my strengths are basically where I think the community is headed. So I think I have a really big opportunity in the next couple of years to really make that push, grow my channel a lot, and become kind of that next big figure.
Yeah.
So that's where my aspirations are at right now. And I really don't say that in a disrespectful way to anyone. Like like I said, I'm very hard on myself, but I have very high aspirations. I want to be that person. I want to be the best.
Without the context that it's your mindset, this would sound very much like, you know, a bad guy's a bad guy's speech of like, I want to become the best, and you know what? I'm gonna train to become the best. I'm gonna brute force my way to the top. Which, like, with the context that it's you, I think I get the kind of like that's just your mindset. That's kind of what drives you. That's what
when I say brute force, I more mean like I think a lot, like I'd say Benjamin, for example, is very like he kind of just goes with the flow and makes whatever. And then sometimes what he makes is like genius level. For me, my process is like I have every individual aspect meticulously planned out. This is this way, and I know it's going to work because of this, this, and this.
Your genius is very intentional.
It's very literal. And I think that's been to my detriment a lot if we're talking about weaknesses. Is that I was kind of talking about with the last question. I just try too hard sometimes, and it comes off, and it's very corny and unlikable. And especially now I've started listening to a lot more music and grown my taste in art, I found consistently that there's kind of an unspoken level of confidence and swagger to the greatest to ever do it that isn't really something you can pinpoint exactly and explain scientifically. It's just a thing, an air they have about them. So more recently, I've been trying to incorporate stuff in my projects where I purposely go hands off and like, I'm not worried about, does this make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How does it all come together? If it sounds good and it works in my head, then I'm just gonna let it through and see what happens. And for example, an example of a thing that from a recent project that was exactly like that is the turn my golf cart around and bash you again segment from Stan versus Saul. I wouldn't be able to explain to you why that works or why it's funny. It just came to me and I was like, I want to put this in and see what happens. And people ended up absolutely loving it.
Yeah, absolutely.
People quote it, and like I love that people love it because that kind of comedy element to it is something that I was not good at even like a year before I made that battle. Like evidence with things like Duck versus Goose, where I was trying to be funny, but it was funny in like a try-hard Eddie way where it was not really that funny.
Right.
So yeah, I would say my greatest strength is my drive and my motivation, and I dream big, I have big aspirations, and I will not stop until they come to fruition. But my weakness is you know, the process itself, it can be demotivating sometimes. It can result in tunnel visioning. Sometimes I'll overthink.
I said this jokingly to you. Every now and then you have your Icarus moment, and it's very interesting. I think everyone else can kind of see it. Not saying that like you know, we can't wait to see you fail, but it's like every now and then it's like.
So when you say Icarus moment, you basically mean like
punching above your weight almost.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yep. I mean, it's going to happen. I would rather try and fail than not try at all. I guess is what I would say. If I am ever to make something truly at like a super great level, then I have to try to make it. And if that results in failure, then it's gonna suck. But I'm glad I tried.
For sure.
And I think in some ways, a lot of my projects on a micro scale are like that. Like Duck versus Goose, in terms of what I was trying to do versus how it actually turned out. You know, with context, I think I was kind of trying to do something I didn't fully understand how to do yet. But you know, that's part of the process, and I wouldn't have been able to make the better projects I've made since if I didn't, you know, kind of fail with that one, because it was a learning experience.
So, what I want to talk about now, we cut off on it earlier, but talking about Reanimated and, you know, the concept of remaking battles, I know you were envisioning that there could start a wave for this. I do want to quickly point out that the idea of like remaking battles was definitely not new to Reanimated, but I do think
it was me. It was all me.
I do think Reanimated calls it into attention in a different way that, like, you know, not a lot of people make such a statement out of remaking battles as Reanimated. Why Reanimated? And more so of like, how does that help kind of reshape your view on some of those, on the battles that you are like remaking, for lack of a better term?
I'm not gonna lie to you. Right now, I'm kind of putting Reanimated on the shelf and focusing on original stuff, because I did not get the reception from Salad vs. Marionette Reanimated that I wanted. And that doesn't mean I expected everyone to be like, this is the best thing ever. And it's not about necessarily people liking it or not liking it, because I think generally it was very well received. But I don't think it recontextualized the old one in the way that I wanted it to. I think it's just kind of like, it just feels kind of weird. I don't know if you feel like that. It's not that it's bad, but it's kind of weird to think about and discuss and compare. It just doesn't really feel like something I would do, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm glad I did it, and I do have ideas for other Reanimated projects in the future. But Salad vs. Marionette is weird because I really wanted to keep it very close to the original, because in my head, people were like really attached to the original. And it was like, oh, if you changed it too much, people would complain about that. But I got a lot of complaints about stuff not changing enough. And I got a lot of people saying, oh, well, at this point, I just prefer the original. I was kind of trying to make like the definitive version, like a re-released, repackaged version, just with maybe like some bugs fixed and stuff.
Sure.
But I think that it's not different enough to be like its entirely separate project. You have to think about it in the same way you think about the original, but it's not similar enough to where it replaces the original. I think they kind of exist separately in this weird limbo, and I think to some degree it's nice that like they can both stand on their own, but it also kind of makes it you wonder what the point of it was. So that all being said, I don't regret making Salad vs. Marionette Reanimated, but in the future for Reanimated, I'm going to do more of like a remake from the ground up. What I do want to do is continue to bring back the original crew and the original voice actors, but I want to rewrite things mostly, and then probably choose new beats for some of the battles, recast some of the characters if I can't cast the same person or if it wouldn't work out the same way. And with Reanimated going forward, I just want to do it more, make them more different, and like care less about, oh, are people going to be upset that I changed this? Because the original is always going to exist, and there are always going to be people who prefer the original. So I might as well just make it its own thing with Reanimated.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it was going to take a couple Reanimateds before I figured out exactly where I wanted to go with that, so I don't hate that it exists. I think on it, like, in a vacuum, it's an incredibly well-made project. A lot of that stuff still has aged pretty well, which I'm pretty happy about. Considering that most of it was made in 2020, the fact that it can still be as impressive as it is as a late 2023 release means that there was merit to remaking it and giving it a better video. I think it's, like you said, it's weird in the sense that obviously remaking battles, remastering them is nothing new, but what I did with Salad Fingers, where it's not a complete tear it down and rebuild it from the ground up, but I changed enough about it so that it doesn't outclass the old one. So no one had really done something with that kind of vibe before, and I guess I was like, I didn't know how people were going to react to it, and I think a lot of people were just kind of like, this is cool, but like, I'm kind of confused. Like, I don't really know how to feel about it. And I think that I also feel that way, but I wouldn't have known that until I went through with it. So I'm glad I went through with it, but to answer your question, I thought that people were going to perceive it differently than they did. They didn't. Not in the sense that they didn't like it, but that it's still kind of, it was executed in kind of a weird way that's kind of hard to pin down. So for future Reanimateds, I want to focus more on remaking more of it and just keeping the spirit in other ways, like bringing back the cast, or maybe reusing the beat, or maybe even reusing some of the lines or some of the joke ideas. But more in ways that it's like, if you've seen the old battle, you can like point it out whenever it shows up, like, oh, I remember that from the old one, instead of like, I feel like with Salad Fingers versus Marionette, it's like you pointed out when it was different instead of like when it was the same.
Right.
And I kind of want to be the opposite, where it's like you were watching and it's the same battle, except, oh, this line right here changed. It's like, that's the rarity. Whereas I want to kind of flip it around, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I do have other battles I want to do a remake for. I need to figure out how to do them. The other thing is that obviously, like, it takes a lot of time and money to make the Reanimateds, and especially even more if they're going to be like ground up, like new battles. So I need to make sure there's the market for it and that people will be interested in watching them. Salad Fingers vs. Marionette Reanimated didn't do badly. It's at 4 of 10 right now, but it didn't blow up by any means. So jury's still out on how interested my viewers are in it. So that's another thing that it's going to take a couple more episodes to figure out.
Let's move on. This will probably be a pretty quick topic, since I don't think this happens very often. You don't publicly scrap a lot of things. A lot of things we see from you are like, you know, our release. But
yep.
But something like Suicide Mouse IVI versus Needle Mouse, or fucking like going a bit farther back with like Ochako Uraraka, I don't even know how to the V, 6 V's.
Captain Viridian. Yeah.
Captain Viridian, I think, yeah. And okay, I'll quickly ask, did you upload Mom vs. Donald Trump just for the BOTM thing?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Danny found it in an old Pico song up drive, and he sent it to me like, oh my god, I've never heard this before. And we were laughing about it and some of the lines in it. And now that I had the file again, I was like, fuck it, I'll just upload it. I'll upload it to the backup SoundCloud because it's funny and other people might want to listen to it and have a laugh about it.
So, again, it doesn't really happen much anymore, but what kind of causes you to scrap projects when it does happen?
Well, like you said, it doesn't happen that much because, like, I don't like to make very much progress on a project until I'm sure I can finish it. I don't like my work going to waste. And so whenever battles do get scrapped, it's usually so early on in production that I don't really have much to show for it. Because before I start making a battle, I kind of have everything I want to do figured out in my head. So usually, if I scrap a battle, there's something between conception and, like, the next stage where it's like, oh, wait a second, this isn't going to work for these reasons. For Suicide Mouse versus Needle Mouse, I mean, there are a couple reasons. I wouldn't even consider that animation versus anything. I would consider them both animation, I think, right now. I don't want to do Suicide Mouse again because I think CJ did Suicide Mouse perfectly. And the entire idea for that battle was I wanted to do something in the style of Relapse era Eminem, and I still like Relapse era Eminem, but it's not. I don't think it would have gone over as well as I thought it would have. So that's just kind of something that I realized later on, that like, hey, this idea kind of sucks ass, and I don't want to finish it, so I didn't. For Viridian versus Ochako, I just didn't think it was good enough. Basically, all there was to it. It was written, but it never entered the recording stage because basically as soon as I got the flow test back, I was like, this stinks. And it's funny that I say that now, like thinking that in 2020 that like I had like Alistair versus Siren Head, I'm like, oh no, this is gas, bro. Jack versus Sans, no, this is the one. But for whatever reason back then, when I heard that demo back, I was like, nope, this isn't good enough. To the bin it goes. That was kind of a weird case because I haven't really done anything like that since. Like even with Needle Mouse, for like it was one verse that I wrote and demoed roughly, whereas the Viridian battle was fully written. I just felt like it didn't fit and it wasn't good enough, basically. I just wanted to do a battle with Captain Viridian because that's one of my favorite indie games, and Ochako's like the only gravity-based character in all of animation, so I was kind of like, alright, well I guess I have to do this matchup. And I think you can tell in the writing that I did not give a shit about Ochako as a character. I think I watched like the first season of My Hero Academia, and it wasn't even for that project. I had just done it previously.
Yeah, you've talked about like, the kind of...
I don't like My Hero Academia at all.
That's very fair.
I think Ochako is a gigantic nothing burger of a character, and it reflects in the writing of that battle. That's one of the many reasons I decided to scrap it. And then Mom versus Donald Trump was literally, it would have happened if I found a voice actor for Mom, but I didn't, so it never got finished. Because you have to consider this is 2017. Even by today's standards, where are you going to find someone to do that voice? I don't know if you've heard Mom from Futurama, but it's like an old lady that sounds like an old lady. That's like a difficult voice to... Like an authentic old lady, not an old lady impression. Like they have like an 80-year-old woman play her. So it's like...
Interesting.
I couldn't find anyone to do that. So it just never was finished, basically.
Gotcha.
But what causes me to scrap a project? Basically just... I don't see it having a future that I'm happy with. I try and look into the future with the project and think, if this goes the way it's going right now and it releases, what will I think of the final product? And if the answer isn't like, I think it's going to be good and I'm satisfied with it, then I will scrap it, essentially.
Right, okay. A bit more general community talk. Let's talk a bit about Battle of the Month. You and I are two people pretty attached to it in a couple different ways. We both help run it. We are pretty... When we did take the time to do it, we were pretty stats focused on it. We like did a lot of the fun, little stats for it. What's your sort of outlook into why you participate in Battle of the Month? And I know we have our again, this was recorded before. I don't know if this is even happening, but before the reform, as we're calling it. But what's your, without getting into your idea, because I know you have an idea and I know you want to share that with the jury, but kind of what are some things about Battle of the Month that you would pitch as changes? So those are my kind of two questions based on that.
I started off with Battle of the Month because I'm a very competitive person and it was a good motivator. Winning was like a pretty clear goal, and then I won, and then I kept winning, and it was like, okay, well, then at this point, I guess one of the reasons I still do it is because of the streak. I think the streak is just kind of funny at this point, and the other reason I do it is because since Dustin stopped submitting, and now I think Patrick stopped submitting too, I kind of like being the final boss type, where it's like, I will win most months, but the month where I lose, people are gonna go nuts. Like, they're gonna be so happy for whoever beat me. It's gonna be a huge story. It's gonna be a moment.
And people are really mad when you win. Yeah, it's fucking...
Yeah. So like, it becomes like an antagonist thing where I'm kind of like the villain that keeps winning. And it's like, people don't like take it that seriously, but it's like,
for the most part.
I don't think there are a whole lot of other people right now who could be that kind of final boss figure in Battle of the Month. So for me, it's like, I like to still submit, because one, the streak is funny, and I like having, stacking up the accolades to my name.
Absolutely.
Like, just having stuff that, like, in 5 years, regardless if a Battle of the Month is still around or not, people will still be talking about it having existed. And when Battle of the Month comes up, my name will come up. So that's just, I'm part of the community history with that. But also, more immediately, I just like being part of that narrative, because I think the most fun part of any competition are the storylines and the narratives, and I think my win streak is one of the most interesting storylines that's come out of Battle of the Month in recent times, and I want to continue that.
I mean, yeah, I guess the day that we see you lose, well, yeah, you submitted Mom versus Donald Trump, so, and you talked about it again.
Yeah, I was considering keeping it in the... my current plan, sorry to burst your bubble, is I'm going to unsubmit it.
Darn.
But it did cross my mind to keep it submitted and purposely throw and get, like, 9th place if we were to even do Battle of the Month. And then be, like, just kind of not take it seriously at all. And just be like, oh my god, guys, this is only the beginning. Like, I got punched down, but I can come back up again. Obviously, like, being really facetious about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then just having people forever argue about, oh, another one to the streak. Oh, no, his streak ended in January. Oh, no, that doesn't count. Yes, it does, yada, yada. I just think that argument back and forth would be really funny. But that kind of, like, goes against what I was talking about with the storyline. So I think ultimately I'm going to unsubmit it. Just fair. Because I want that moment for whoever does beat me to be big.
For sure.
That's the main reason I do it. Obviously, it's still validating to see, people, like my stuff to a point where it wins. And we have the Hall of Fame system, where battles that get over a 90% are, like, forever inducted into this Hall of Fame. And that's, like, another thing that motivates me still, is that regardless of how many times I win, you can win and not be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I've won, like, 6 times the past year, but only, like, I think 3 of them got inducted. So I want to make projects that get inducted into that Hall of Fame level, just because I think it's a fun thing. So I'd say that as to why I still do it. And then you asked what changes I want to see made. I don't know if I really want to get into that here. Like, I have ideas, but I don't even know if I'm confident that it would be better. So
that's fair.
I'll say just wait and see. For all you listening out there, just wait and see. I got some ideas. Okay.
This is being recorded before another video that I'm recording is my little let's argue about, where I give my thoughts and I comment on a couple other people's thoughts on, should Battle of the Month even stay as a thing? Right. And if it does, should it change, and what should we change? And I obviously
have an idea. I have an idea for a complete reform that basically I want to make it transparent that it would end my streak and basically all streaks, because basically I would turn it from a competition into not a competition. But I don't know if that's the right choice, and that's something we still need to talk about.
Yeah. I think I know this idea, and I think there's positives and negatives to it, obviously. But, like, there's some stuff that we haven't really talked or touched on, and that is something that I would like to do with the reform.
Yeah, we can do that
when we get to that. For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So let's touch on our last point here. What do you want to be your kind of impact on the community? Like, what do you wish that future creators will look at your catalog and take notice of, or your process, kind of, what are some things that you wish to pass on to creators as, the landscape changes and whatnot?
That's a tough question, and I find myself asking that a lot. So I'll give you a couple scattered ideas, because I'll be honest, I'm still figuring it out.
For sure.
I said already I want to be the best. Even if I do get to that level, I'm not going to stay at that level, nor would I want to. I want to have my moment, and then to have people... I want the community to be in good hands. Ultimately, I think my biggest picture answer to this is that I want to help make rap battles more than just like, ERB ripoffs. I want to turn it into a genre that has a bright future ahead. I think right now I'm at a point where I have I don't want to say authority, but, like, people's eyes are on me. I have, like, the platform to be that person who helps, or be one of the people who helps to push rap battles into the collective consciousness of the internet and a lot of associated communities in a more positive connotation than they previously were. So I don't, I want to be like a legend in the community. I like, even after I stop making battles, I want people to like still be talking about me and my work and stuff.
Hell yeah.
But I think a lot of people have that wish. Like, you don't want all your stuff. You don't want to be forgotten. That's just kind of human nature. Mainly, I just kind of want to use the position I'm in right now to steer the community in the right direction in more ways than one, both in terms of how the content is made, like what's valued, and in terms of how outsiders view rap battles. I want it to be a more positive, responsible, mature, and respected subgenre than it previously was. And I think we've already made great strides with that. I think Dustin, starting in 2020, is the big cheese with that, so to speak. And as much as it's not a surprise that I take a lot of pride in what I do and I think highly of my own work. But I cannot argue that even as of right now, I would say Dustin, in any objective manner, is still the top dog, just because of how ridiculously important what he's done for the community is.
For sure.
What he's done for battles as a whole. I wouldn't be where I am today without Dustin. Ironically, he wouldn't be where he is today without me, so it's kind of a fun little dynamic there.
Nice.
But I want to have that moment in my rap battle career where people can look back and say, oh, that's the Eddie era, Because even if Dustin like stops making battles tomorrow, he will always be a legend, and people will talk about the 2020 to 2023 run where he was everywhere with the Mr. Beast meme, the Orchestrap. Like he popularized so much stuff. And regardless of how I feel about every individual one of his projects, the impact and influence that he's had is so much bigger and more impressive and harder to accomplish than any of those individual things. And I guess that's what I want to accomplish, is I want to get to that level. And I think I have a really good start. There are a lot of people in all eras of the community that were really good and very respected. There's only ever been a handful that were at that level of impactfulness and influence. And like I said earlier, I have ideas for things I want to do in the future that could potentially change the game. We talked about the Icarus moment where it's like, oh, it might not work out, I might fail. But I would rather try and fail than be complacent and just be like, all right, I'm just going to be like one of the pretty good ones. I really want to be that guy that changes the game. And I feel like I'm in a pretty good position to do it. So that's my main thing, I would say. And then on a smaller level, I just want to entertain people. I think that in a strange way, don't take it the wrong way, I feel like, considering what I'm doing with like making videos, hundreds of thousands of people are watching them and enjoying them. I've got a lot of quote unquote fans. It still kind of feels weird to say that, but I suppose you could there would be a lot of people who would consider themselves fans of mine. I feel like, in a certain sense, the fact that I'm doing something that makes that many people happy on such a regular basis is my positive contribution to the world. I'm not saving the planet. I'm not reversing global warming. I'm not feeding the home. I'm not doing any of these big picture things. But as an individual, I'm making a positive impact, even if it's very tiny, on a lot of people's lives. And that's what's most personally fulfilling about life to me. Aside from just entertainment and art in general, is that I love that I can be that person for other people. And specifically, I remember being a 12-year-old kid and watching, kind of goes back to the start of this conversation about CMRB, just being starry-eyed, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I want to do this one day. And I want to be that person for another generation of younger people, or even older people, who just watch it and go, hey, this looks really fun and interesting, I want to do that. And I'm already seeing so many people cite me as one of their inspirations for wanting to start, or people leave me comments about hey, I'm 13. I've even gotten some emails from fans like that, and it makes me smile. Obviously I can come off as a bit of a hard ass, but there's a human element to the impact that my work has on people that it humbles me. It really does.
Hell yeah.
And I want to I have a platform. I'm making people happy, and I want to continue to make more people happy.
Yeah, I mean, that's about as good of a note as we can top that off on. I think it's very cool to talk to you and kind of see your thought process, because you are one of the people who there's a reason I reached out to you first for this, is because you're just a very like you put a lot of thought into like everything you do, and not saying that other creators don't, but like there's something about your kind of process that all feels, like you've said before, very on purpose and very thought through, that I think that like there's a reason you're where you are, and there's a reason you have the rep that you do for being as unique as you are. And
and I want to just quickly make the point, we're kind of past this now, but when I'm talking about like I'm gonna be number one and nothing's gonna stop me and I'm not gonna stop, that's what we mean by that. Like I don't mean it in a sense that I'm gonna do whatever and drag whoever down. I just mean like to the best of my ability, I'm driven to succeed in what I want to do.
Hell yeah.
Not in a supervillain way, but just in a way that like I'm just very motivated and I love what I do.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right.
It's the autism, bro. That's why I am the way.
No, here's the thing. In the back of my head, at a certain point, I was wondering if I could make that kind of quip at some point of like, man, that's the autism in you.
It's but good, bro. Hey, listen.
Hey, I'm undiagnosed, man. I want people to know not that, my place and time. Once I get diagnosed, it's over for everyone else, dude.
It's over, bro.
I'll be so powerful. But anyway, thank you so much for Eddie for spending 2 hours of your time here.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate getting the chance to speak to people, and I appreciate anyone who listened all the way through and listened to me ramble. I'm not always the most organized, but I like talking about my process because I take a lot of pride in it, and I know a lot about what I do, and I like to teach people and help them out, or at least have them consider an alternate perspective every once in a while.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to have you kind of like talk about all that. All right, and that is gonna wrap it up for the Wrap Out podcast. Obviously, if you want more, let me know. Who do you want? Let me know. I have plans for future guests. Me and Eddie talked about that before we started here.
Eddie and I.
Yes, okay. Eddie and I talked about it before we started here. About future guest ideas. I have some ideas already, but I would love to know who everyone would like to hear from. Yeah, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Peace out.
Bye. I need a better outro for next time.
Bye. It's fucking Kirby. Bye.
Bye.